Dealing with the devil, devil dealing cards ain't on the level. Michael Harris was beginning to send thugs to visit Suge requesting repayment of original investment and profits from the record label. Suge's inner circle was turning. Apparently, Suge had double-crossed Harry-O and Lydia Harris when he switched from time. Dealing with the devil, devil dealing cards ain't on the level. Michael Harris was beginning to send thugs to visit Suge requesting repayment of original investment and profits from the record label. Suge's inner circle was turning them away. Apparently, Suge had double-crossed Harry-O and Lydia Harris when he switched from Time Warner to Interscope for distribution. He somehow managed to redo the contracts and cut them out of everything. He even denied them ever being part of the record label. He took the phone that was designated to accept Harry-O's calls away by putting a block on it so no more collect calls could come through. The original deal for Death Row Records was a partnership between the DOC 35%, Dr. Dre 35%, Suge Knight 15%, and Dick Griffey 15%. I was the first one signed to the label, but a lot of things weren't etched in stone when I go there. I met Dick Griffey, and one of the first things he asked was for me to sing for him, so I sang for him. And then there was this entity that we started to call the studio. We didn't have a lot of money in the beginning. We had some, but not a lot. Jewel. When the DOC had his accident and could no longer sing, his value to the venture was severely diminished and his percentage evaporated. Michael Harris, aka Harry-O, came up with the seed money, some of which compensated Dick Griffey, and Death Row was originally formed as a subsidiary of Godfather Entertainment. Lydia Harris was involved at the record label early on, and Death Row Records birthed The Chronic. At the same time, there was a lawsuit filed by Ruthless Records for Knight's role in taking Dr. Dre, the DOC, and Michelle A. from the label. Right before The Chronic is released, Death Row Records is officially formed as a corporation with two equal shareholders, Suge Knight and Dr. Dre. Michael and Lydia Harris were out. There is an official dispute of this account. Wayman Anderson tells of Suge Knight and Death Row Records actually laundering money from Michael and Lydia Harris instead of putting up the seed money. In either case, Michael Harris was upset that Death Row Records achieved stratospheric success and he was not given a taste of the profits. He took that personally. David Kenner was lying to Harris and placing the blame at Suge Knight's feet. Michael Harris had been convicted on drug charges, establishing one of the largest drug trafficking rings in America. He had ties to many of the gangs that distributed his product. He was a dangerous man and very upset with Suge Knight. Even though Harris was incarcerated, he had a long reach from prison and money to make things happen. Wayman Anderson says that Michael and Lydia Harris were part of a plot to overthrow Death Row Records at the time that Tupac Shakur was killed. Later, Anderson says there was money that was laundered through Death Row Records by Lydia while Michael Harris was in jail. And then they later came back and tried to say that they gave Suge money to start Death Row Records, which is totally untrue. A lot of people don't understand the dynamics or the mechanics of how the record industry works. You can get one-hit records, and a record label will advance you $25 million the next morning. So there was no reason for Suge to have to get drug money to start that. His 187 Cop provided them with enough cash to develop his record label. I'm assuming, this is a side note, I'm assuming 187 Cop is deep cover. But at the same time, when you grow up in inner cities the hard way, it's hard to walk away from the individuals you grow up with. So Suge still participated with individuals who were involved in criminal activity, and in doing so he laundered some money for Michael Harris, and then that later came back to bite him in the butt, where she and Michael felt that they should have been provided profits from Death Row Records. And when Suge basically kicked her out, Michael and herself took that very personal, and from there it was on trying to get back at Suge Knight. Wayman Anderson, though unreliable, seems to confirm that there was a plot to take over Death Row Records. He states that the plot was by Lydia and Michael Harris, aka Harry-O. Harry-O was affiliated with Freeway Rick Ross, and they were both affiliated with Crips, who they worked with to move their drugs around the country. It isn't a stretch to think that Michael Harris could have easily reached back to people he knew from his drug running days to topple Death Row Records. He could have easily reached out to Reggie Wright Jr., as is indicated in the confession letter, to carry out his plan. Robert J. Frank asks Anderson in his deposition, "You indicated that Michael Harris, I think you said Lydia Harris, and who else can you name as part of that conspiracy?" Anderson answers, "Those are all that I can do at this point." He was the king. He wore the crown. Traitors brought him down. Suge had been a protege of Dick Griffey, who founded Sound of Los Angeles Records, commonly known as Solar. Suge brought Mario Johnson, aka Chocolate, to Solar with a claim that Johnson had written Ice Ice Baby for Vanilla Ice. Griffey immediately understood the claim. Suge confronted Ice about the claim in what has become music industry legend and Suge Knight lore, as like most legends, is disputed. The claim that Suge dangled Vanilla Ice by his ankles off of the balcony at the Riot House, adding to the music history there, to get him to sign off on the royalty payments has become one of the calling cards Suge Knight never needed to present whenever he met with anyone connected to the music. Suge's reputation precedes him to this day. But Suge had a fatal flaw. Under that thick skin, Suge Knight had a heart. When Suge Knight was riding high, all of those around him benefited. Every year at Thanksgiving, he would give out turkeys in the community. Every year at Christmas, he would buy toys for the kids. And on Mother's Day, he would host a luncheon for 500 single mothers. When Suge Knight had money, he spread it around the community. When Suge was in jail at Christmas of 1996, he authorized $50,000 to be used for toys for the kids of Compton. Only $3,000 actually got to the kids. Reggie and his friends, all of which lived lives of privilege, hijacked the rest for their own Christmas. Suge was responsible for giving all of his friends opportunities within the company and for starting new ventures to keep his friends employed. Inside, Suge Knight was calm. He reasoned that he had created that delicate balance inside the record label. Suge ran the label with an iron fist. He had to have his say in everything that went on at Death Row. No matter what a person needed or wanted from the label, if they didn't have Suge's approval, then it couldn't happen until they received it. He needed to be tough, or the criminal forces would overpower him. But not too tough, or he would face arrests and prison. So far, the team he put together had insulated him from career-ending entanglements. They had his back. He could relax and enjoy an evening in Vegas to celebrate his celebrity. The drama of the record label was ongoing. He enjoyed it, he craved it, and sometimes he caused it. Everything had been navigated with precision through dealings with Dick Griffey, Harry O, Lydia, the record companies, artists, criminal cases, and crisis management. When the knife cuts away from you, it is a beautiful sight, but when the two-edged blade is pushed back, the pain is unbearable, even for a tough guy. But what did he have to fear? He was surrounded by his best friends, who would remain loyal until the end. Or would they? It only took one traitor to upset all of that work, planning, and risk-taking. One night in Vegas, it would all come crumbling down. Suge bounced from trap to trap like a ping-pong ball. He had no idea about what was going on around him. To Suge, the loyalty of Neckbone, Jake, Heron, Hendog, Poochie, Buntree, and the rest of his MOB Pyru homies were guaranteed. They all vowed to pursue money over bitches, MOB, and if necessary, to give their lives for each other. Most of them would remain loyal until the end. That end would come far too soon for all of them, but for Jake, Suge's best friend. He would be the first, and Suge would take it very hard. Suge Knight made his dislike for Sean Puffy Combs public. On the night of August 3rd, 1995, on stage at the Source Awards, Suge levels his sights directly at Sean Puffy Combs when he says, "Any artist out there who want to be an artist and want to stay a star and don't want the executive producer trying to be all in the videos, all over the record dancing, come to Death Row." He saw Combs as an imitator that was putting out weak versions of Death Row's product. At the Platinum Club in Atlanta, there was a confrontation between 5 black males, allegedly representatives of Sean Puffy Combs, on one side, and Suge and High Robles on the other side. The 5 men are ordered to leave the club, and Suge and High are instructed to remain behind for 10 to 15 minutes. They leave after only a few minutes, and High is shot when getting into the limousine. Jake would give his life protecting Suge. Suge saw this as an attempt by Puffy to have him killed. Puffy claims he was talking to Suge at the time shots ride out. Jake Robles, Suge's friend, fellow blood, and bodyguard, is killed. Suge accuses Puffy of being involved, but he responds, "What are you talking about? I was standing right here with you." The shooter reportedly climbs into a limousine filled with Puffy's friends. Wolf, Sean Combs' bodyguard, is blamed for the murder, even though an off-duty police officer was chasing Wolf into the parking lot at the time. But either way, there is a gaping hole in Suge Knight's heart, and this galvanizes his hatred for Sean Puffy Combs and escalates the East Coast-West Coast feud. If Jake had lived, tensions would not have elevated. Reggie Wright Jr.'s role may have been severely altered, providing him with far less opportunity to portray Suge. But that one night in Atlanta had galvanized Suge's hatred for Sean Combs. He was obsessed with getting even. He was obsessed with making Sean Combs hurt the way he hurt when he lost his best friend. This murder was a turning point of the East Coast rivalry with the West Coast. Jewel tells that Suge held grudges. Deep inside, I knew he was still pissed and would eventually do something to get me back. That was just the way Suge operated. He never let someone get over on him. He made sure he got his chance to fuck them over no matter how long it took. Bruce Richardson, a high school friend of Suge's, had become a rival, having built up his own company to mirror Death Row. Their problems came to a head. Bruce knew he was being screwed over on royalties. His artist, Dramacidal, did background vocals on Tupac's album, All Eyes on Me. Suge refused to pay. That May, Bruce approached him in the club and slapped him up. 2 weeks later, Richardson lay dead outside his own home in Los Angeles, with 2 Bloods suspected of killing him. An enraged Richardson confronted Suge a short time later at a nightclub, where he astonished onlookers by slapping Knight around until 3 of his thugs jumped in and drove Bruce off. Publicly humiliated, Suge made no secret of the fact that he wanted revenge. 2 weeks later, Bruce Richardson was shot to death in his home. Kevin Hackey named Suge Knight's thugs Neckbone and Buntry as the likely hitmen. They were the guys that did this sort of thing for Suge, Hackey said. But Bruce Richardson would never open his door for just anyone. He was also unmatched in his hand-to-hand combat skills. When investigators showed up, Richardson's safe had been opened and music masters had been removed. There were those that speculated that police dressed in uniform were to blame. There were a lot of guys that would do shit on the side, but they didn't come around. It was handled on the outside. Death Row Police disturbed the peace. On June 2nd, 1996, the LAPD and Death Row Records representatives met to discuss dissatisfaction with armed security personnel and the possibility of armed confrontations between police officers and security personnel or gang members. Issues regarding off-duty police officers employed by Death Row Records also were discussed. Prior to Wallace's death, the LAPD also discovered that Death Row Records employed Leslie Gaulden, an Inglewood School police officer. On October 23, 1996, Alwyn Gittins, a San Bernardino County Sheriff's Reserve officer working security for Death Row Records, disrupted an interview between LAPD and Death Row Records employees. Based on the above occurrences, the LAPD knew or reasonably should have known that its off-duty police officers worked as security guards alongside suspected and convicted criminals for Death Row Records. In fact, the off-duty police officers accompanied gang members during drug deals and acted as their frequencies, assisted in choosing locations for drug transactions, and shared information regarding police tactics. Reggie is the go-between between Suge and all kinds of crazy fucking shit. In May 1996, Death Row Records was investigated for zoning violations associated with numerous violent crimes. Investigating officers reported, there are armed security guards at this location in plain clothes and in security uniforms. These security officers are off-duty police officers, employed by Death Row Records. Suge laid out the plan. Well, look, we can't have our homies out here basically carrying guns. We want to legalize this. Let's set up our own Death Row security set under another name. It was a set just like Bloods and Crips create, but it consisted of law enforcement personnel who had badges and guns and were paid to avert problems for those under the protection of death row records. Suge Knight put up $300,000 to get the set created. It is unknown if there were gang ritual killings to gain membership in the set, but on Frank Alexander's secret tape recordings, we learned that Suge was covertly asking Frank Alexander to take somebody out. There was a lot of guys that did shit on the side, but they didn't come around. All that shit was handled from outside. There were times I would drive and I'd get out and it would just be Reggie and Suge in the middle of fucking nowhere. And I know Reggie was, they shared the same drawers. A mob Piru would get out of fucking line and Reggie would sort it out. Suge had them walking around scared. The security he hired was also used as muscle around the studio. He had them smacking N-words up when they got out of line. The death row police brought immediate results. Having guns and badges to deal with any and all situations was creating a layer of protection beyond expectations. Also, the tactical awareness was rubbing off on the non-cop security personnel. Having police scanners to monitor all frequencies was now incorporated into death row's standard operating procedure. There were additional opportunities for side business as some of the cops had major cash flow needs beyond their cop salaries. How far would they go? That was a question to be asked on a case-by-case basis, but it didn't appear that there were limitations with a handful of the guys. After all, this was a cop set, but everybody that was really in the game knew what that meant. Having insiders at LAPD was also paying off. When evidence that could be used to convict Snoop Dogg needed to disappear from an LAPD evidence locker, the death row police came through. Kevin Hackey recalls in a June 6, 2000 interview that in February, Reggie Wright Jr., when talking about Snoop Dogg's murder case, stated that evidence related to that case came up missing from LAPD property room. He would only know this if he was somehow responsible for the evidence going missing. The evidence in Snoop's murder trial came up missing from an LAPD property room. That is why Snoop was acquitted. Sharitha's boyfriend was certainly the most likely suspect in that crime, along with his good friends Rafael Perez and David Mack. Having an LAPD boyfriend did have certain side benefits. Snoop's album, Murder is the Case, poked fun at the prosecutors, who worked hard to send him away for life but came up short. At a hearing in Snoop Dogg's murder trial, it is disclosed that key evidence is missing from the LAPD evidence locker. Defense attorneys have maintained that the lost 9mm casings might have been useful to match bullets found in Walter Marion's body. They also said the bloody shirt was crucial in determining if the victim was shot at close range or might have been twisting when he was shot. Defense attorneys contend that Walter Marion was reaching into his waistband for a gun when he was shot. The trial run of the new death row police was at the beating of Kelly Jamerson at the El Rey Theater. That night, a sign above the theater read, "Death Row Private Party Guest List Only." On March 13, 1995, a gang member was murdered at a Death Row Records event held at the El Rey Theater. The police report states many of the security people at the party were off-duty police officers from the LAPD, all working for Right Way Security. The victim was beaten by numerous Blood Gang members while the off-duty police officers watched. The victim was beaten to death at the theater. Many of the security people at the party were off-duty police officers from Long Beach PD, Compton PD, Inglewood PD, Hawthorne PD, and LAPD, all working for Right Way Security. The victim was beaten by numerous Blood Gang members while the off-duty police officers watched. When the police arrived, the off-duty officers left the scene without giving a statement. There were numerous officers actually present at the beating. Officers S. Meade, number 30401, and his partner C. Canales, number 30214, observed the beating as it continued in the west portion of the lobby. The officers had been monitoring the party after an earlier 415 fight, radio call at the location. Incident number 50720050553. In spite of witnessing the event, they are never referenced as witnesses in the report. The anonymous callers all put DJ Quick in the frame for the murder. "Curious timing. It was significant," he said when asked about the death row era. "I, DJ Quick, think at that point Suge was he became real powerful from Interscope. Suge wanted to look out for all the artists he felt weren't getting taken care of in the industry. So that's why we all gravitated towards him. At that point, I was going through it with record label Profile. Profile had this thing where When they didn't want to pay you, they put you on suspension. My artist was on suspension. So I stayed on suspension because they didn't want to pay me. It was just weird. So Suge stepped in, became my manager. Was the El Rey murder of Kelly Jamerson nothing more than a negotiation with DJ Quick? The investigation also puts Suge's best friends Buntry and Jake in the crosshairs. But Death Row Damage Control had worked. No charges were ever filed, and the case was cleared by homicide investigators. The Death Row police had every reason to grow bold. MC8 recalls the incident. We finna just start a ruckus, and it was only 3 of them, and there was a whole club full of cats from other gangs. But that's how they felt. Us 3 finna go up in there with this sea of Quicks people and Bloods and other factions, and we finna go stand our ground and let them know we from Tragnew Park, and this is how it's gonna go down. Suge Knight grew bold. He grew ferocious. His lion mane was just beginning to show, and he was untouchable. At the party, following Snoop's acquittal, Suge noticed that 4 of the jurors had showed up. They sipped champagne, gorged themselves on steak and lobster, and mingled with the label's acts and associates. Tupac Shakur celebrated the fact that All Eyes on Me had debuted at number 1. Suge told his lackeys he was renaming the company. From then on, it would be known as the New and Untouchable Death Row. Simone Green tells of being beaten by Suge Knight and his henchmen. She tried to call the police from the parking lot, but they didn't come. Someone from the hospital also called the police, but they never came. This was the second attempt to file a police report, and it too went unanswered. It was beginning to feel like an instant cover-up. On December 18, 1995, following the MTV Awards, Death Row Record members seeking Bad Boy Records Combs reportedly assaulted an individual named Mark Anthony Bell. 2 off-duty police officers were present during the assault of Mr. Bell. In the end, LAPD cops participated in murders, an armed bank robbery, home invasions, and theft from LAPD evidence lockers that all became known as the Rampart Scandal. All of those crimes trace back through the halls of Death Row Records. Reggie brought Suge Knight's dream of a law enforcement set to fruition. Reggie Wright Jr. was Suge Knight's biggest blind spot, his childhood friend that could kill him and replace him, or at least that was the theory. For Reggie to have ultimate success, Suge Knight would have to personally install the fox into the henhouse, and that would require a severe amount of trust. Tupac's murder was the beginning of the integration of gangs working together with law enforcement. The tactics behind the murder were executed flawlessly. There were spotters and radios. They selected a prime location on the edge of traffic. Nobody could match his muscle in the music industry. None of Suge's enemies could take him down. He was making hundreds of millions of dollars, and that gave him power, respect, and most of all, prestige. He was known in the best restaurants around the world, as well as the best hotels, automobile dealerships, and inside of music. He was now becoming a superstar celebrity without an equal. But all of that money had attracted some unwanted attention. Jerry Heller and Eazy-E got a percentage off of the top as a settlement to a lawsuit. Also, Suge had concluded his business with Dick Griffey and Michael Harris, but they were both looking for Suge to share a taste of his cash flow. They plotted, but they had no access. Suge had also been rattling Sean Puffy Combs' cage, but he too was powerless to do anything about Suge's attacks. That concludes part 3 of 10 of the Chaos Merchants. What follows now are the excerpts, the footnotes of the chapter. My Blood, My Sweat, My Tears, the autobiography of Jewel Caples by Felicia St. John. Dub CNN interview with Jewel by Chad Kaiser, November 2011. Wayman Anderson deposition in the Wallace civil trial. Frank Alexander's secret tape recordings. The 1995 Source Hip Hop Music Awards. Labyrinth, a detective investigates the murders of Tupac Shakur and the Notorious B.I.G. by Randall Sullivan. Suge Knight's Run-Ins with the Law, a Timeline by Jeff Rosenthal, February 15, 2015. Russell Poole tape-recorded interview with Death Row Dave on February 6, 2014. Wallace civil trial, July 23, 2002. Order granting and denying motions in Wallace estate for a city of Los Angeles. Russell Poole interview with Death Row Dave. Kevin Hackey interview with LAPD detectives Miller and Poole, 5/12/1998. Frank Alexander's secret tape recordings of his conversations in the aftermath of Tupac's murder. Kevin Hackey interview with LAPD detectives Grant and Tyndall on June 6, 2000. LA Times article written by Frank B. Williams. Police report DR number 950714398, fax to Wilshire detectives January 4th, 1996. Official police report of the El Rey murder of Kelly Jamerson. Statement of L.A. Arrowine, a Long Beach police officer working undercover for the FBI and ATF investigating death row records on 9/29/1997. DJ Quick interview with BallerStatus.com, October 13, 2014. MC8 praises Kendrick Lamar, recalls DJ Quick's clever line, and Tupac's Menace to Society days by Paul Arnold. Have Gun, Will Travel, The Spectacular Rise and Violent Fall of Death Row Records by Ronan Rowe. Time Served, My Days and Nights on Death Row Records, Simone Green. Frank Alexander's secret tape recordings of a conversation with Michael Moore speculate about who would replace Suge. Aspects of Chaos Merchants is based on Tupac 187 by R.J. Bond and Michael Douglas Carlin, with contributions by former LAPD Wallace case detective Russell Poole. If you would like to order a copy, a link is in the description below. Thank you for watching this episode of Chaos Merchants. We will see you in part 4.